Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Prof.
How are you guys?
Alhamdulillah. Feeling great.
Amar? Nice background.
Yep.
Every week you have a new background. I'm so jealous. I want a background.
Only from YouTube.
You're always in a new, exciting location.
Hopefully can boost my spirit.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, Prof.
I tend to say hi to the people whose faces I can see. If I can't see your face, it's harder to recognize people. So,
Okay.
But hello to everyone who's there, even though I just see some names. I see a lot of names. We'll just give everyone else a few minutes to get on before we start.
All right.
Let me see if I can open this. August the 4th.
Because it sounds like Dougie is very hungry.
All right, well, it looks like we may have a sort of small group today, but it's okay.
So this is it, Prof?
I don't know. As of right now, it looks like it, so it's okay. We'll start, and I'm sure they'll come in slowly, or maybe they're taking the week off, who knows? Okay, so Assalamu alaikum again, and good afternoon to everyone. So this week, we're into week 12, okay? Let me just pull up the Putra Blast. Oh, didn't change my screen here. Can you all see Putra Blast now? Okay, so week 12. So we, this week we're doing a special class. Rather than having any reading presentations or my sort of lecturing or anything, we're gonna have some video presentations on a topic that you asked for, which is on theory and theoretical frameworks and their use in qualitative research. I was quite surprised when I started to look for videos on this topic. It was quite hard to find, actually. And it's actually not, when I think about it a little bit, it's actually not that surprising, only because if you are trying to find books on this topic, it's also hard to find books on this topic. There's very few books written about use of theory in qualitative research. I have a couple, but there's not many. And so actually, when I think about it, yeah, okay. But you know, you'd think nowadays YouTube that they've covered everything. There's a few. So what I did was I tried to find. I found a couple shorter videos on the use of theory in research in general, specifically as it applies to doing your dissertation or your thesis. So I think the first two that I've chosen, I think, are very relevant to all you guys as students, and I think they'll be helpful as students, because everything in there applies to whether it's a qualitative or quantitative study. The material applies to you. And then the third video is a video from the qualitative research perspective from a scholar in Canada. And that one I will show last. She's a little bit abstract. I'm not crazy about her talk, but she does hit on some important points in relation to qualitative research that I think it's worth showing. And like I usually do during the class, I'll narrate as we go. I'll stop and comment, and then you guys can ask questions, and so it'll be a free flow. I can stop the video at any time. We can ask questions. We can have discussion. All right. So please make sure you keep your questions about theory at the forefront of your mind, so that when they start discussing these issues, they come up. You can ask them, and then we can have a discussion about them. Okay, so this is a topic that, of course, requires a lot of time and patience to really digest it and understand it. But there's, I think, some good points that we'll be hitting on today. Okay, so are there any questions about the class today or anything else? Housekeeping issues, not a whole lot. We've got our final exam date. We decide on August 4th. We're already in week 12, so after this, just 2 more weeks. Assignment 5 is due week 14, don't forget, okay? Any problems or questions about the codebook assignment, assignment 5? No? Okay, well, if you do, just let me know. How many we got now? All right, let me stop sharing this, hold on.
Prof?
Yeah.
Talking about theory in qualitative research, I do agree with your observations about
Okay.
books and also videos relating to theories in qualitative research, because
And articles.
article, yeah, because most of the researchers explain that they are not really attached to any sort of theories in building up cases in qualitative research.
Yeah.
So that is why few weeks back I did mention about these topics, which hopefully will benefit us, especially the novice researchers.
Sure.
On this matter.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the reasons, Amar. I think, thank you for mentioning that. I think there are quite a few qualitative researchers out there that they don't put a lot of stock in theory at the early stages of their studies. They don't use theory or theoretical frameworks the way that quantitative researchers do. And it just so happens that UPM, I think, we have a very positivistic kind of bias, whereas even among the qualitative researchers, there's this very strong expectation for you to have a very solid theoretical framework, very much like the way they do in quantitative research. So, but I think in the second video, Dr. Guy, he's going to talk about the importance of having, he's really good. He talks in very straightforward language, easy to understand, especially for students. And I love the way he explains this stuff. He's really good. And I think you'll appreciate his videos. He's going to explain to you why theory is important in research. And once you listen to him, I think you can, as a qualitative researcher, you can also appreciate it more as well. Because he really makes a really good, but very down-to-earth argument about why we need research, why we need theory when we do research. So that'll be the second video. Okay, so the first one, let's get started here. The first one, let me share my screen again. The first video is a short one. It's only about 7 minutes, and it's sort of like an introduction. Oops. Let me see. I hope that I can. Okay. All right. So this first one is really for students. It's called Framing the Dissertation. It's only about 6.5 minutes. It's an introduction really to theoretical and conceptual frameworks. And this academic, she does a really nice job, I think, of explaining the differences between a theoretical and conceptual framework and their use and their application. So it's a good way to introduce the topic, I think. So I'm gonna just, we'll get going with it. And then again, if we have any questions, feel free to stop at any time. I will also be stopping from time to time just to elaborate and provide some commentary, okay? All right, so let's get going. I hope the sound is good. I hope you guys can hear it well.
Provides a brief discussion of the distinctions between and uses of theoretical and conceptual frameworks in the development of a dissertation. So first, what is a theory and how do we get from theory to framework? So as more and more research is conducted, the findings of many different studies and the relationships observed between the constructs of interest in those studies gets considered together. We try to understand the findings of many different projects together to better understand the field as a whole, so that we can better develop our understanding of the relationships that are presented within those studies. That generalization, getting from the individual studies to an understanding of the relationships in the field as a whole as they've been studied, that generalization leads to what we know as a theory, or a system of ideas meant to explain some phenomenon. We then use those broad theories to help us understand the relationships that exist or that might exist between more specific constructs or variables of interest for our own research. The theoretical framework is the combination of both a theory and the way we use that theory to shape our research design and the expected outcomes of a study.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear the record? Can you hear the video?
Yeah, we can hear the video.
Okay, so this is interesting. What she's starting off is explaining the difference between, or basically how theory is developed, and then how we arrive at a theoretical framework. And so as you can see, findings from many studies. Now, findings from many studies indicates that this is what we would call early research on a topic that's atheoretical. In other words, it's a new topic, it's exploratory, and people are trying to understand it better, right? So they're doing different types of studies. A lot of these are often qualitative studies because there isn't a lot of established theory in that area. Once you begin to get a number of studies that in a certain topic or area, certain relationships, conceptual relationships begin to form, right? In other words, patterns start to emerge from all these different findings of all these studies, you know? And then this is how people begin to theorize. You know, when you start to see the same finding over and over again, you begin to think, okay, well, wait a minute here. Maybe there is a sort of a relationship here that is being sort of explained by all these different studies, because it's a consistent relationship that keeps coming up, right? A causes B, right? And then so people begin to theorize, and they begin to start developing theories, right? Eventually, those theories get tested and they get tweaked a little bit, and you know, a variable added here, a relationship changed here, etc., so that the theory becomes more substantial, and it becomes more of a solid theory. And then that theory is applied back to additional situations, real world situations, and that's the application of the theory to a particular study. That's the theoretical framework, right? So you choose a theory that you're going to apply in your study. So you choose a particular theoretical framework. The theoretical framework is not just the theory, it's the theory as it relates to your study. Okay? That's the theoretical framework. And that's what that's what you really have to understand. Okay? That's very important to understand. There's a difference between Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the context of homeless people in Kuala Lumpur. How does Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory apply to homeless people in Kuala Lumpur? That merging between the real world situation and the theory is where you create or develop your theoretical framework. Okay, so that's sort of what she's talking about. Is that clear? Any questions about that? Okay, sorry, I don't have my comments on. Let me check. Oh, there is a chat. Sorry, I don't have my chat open is what I meant to say. Clearly, okay, thank you. I'm on. You guys can just say it, you don't have to write it. Okay, let me get back to the recording. Okay, so we'll continue.
A framework, in general, is a description or explanation of a problem that uses the concepts or variables of interest to explain why and how the problem even exists, what we might expect to find based on the relationships between those concepts or variables within this larger problem. So frameworks really help us to better understand our own intentions and our own expectations when it comes to conducting research, as well as playing a role in guiding our development of research questions and design, the selection of the data collection method and the tools we'll use, as well as our determination of the best analytic approaches to get us to an answer for our research question. Frameworks, regardless of whether they're conceptual or theoretical, cannot be proven. We can provide evidence that supports and strengthens our frameworks by providing evidence that the relationships we expect to observe really do exist, but we can't prove them. This is consistent with the logic of hypothesis testing and quantitative research. We can attempt to disprove statements, but it's not actually possible to prove anything because we can't ever consider a system of variables within all possible contexts and conditions at the same time. Conceptual and theoretical frameworks have a cyclical relationship. Each type of framework is informed by and then also informs the other type of framework.
Yeah.
In practice, the difference between
Okay, so now she's going to start talking about conceptual frameworks, how they differ from theoretical frameworks. Nora Shikin asked a question, how about theory triangulation? Okay, so I'm assuming you're going back, this is about the discussion about what I mentioned about theoretical frameworks. So yeah, so a theoretical framework, as I mentioned, it's how theory applies, how it's used to formulate or to to formulate your own study. So yes, you can use theory triangulation. You can use multiple theories within a theoretical framework. And again, it all depends on how you are relating those theories to the context of your study. So for example, one theory may not be enough to really zero in on what you want to study, right? So you have to bring in sort of a second theory to explain certain elements of your phenomenon. Okay, so that would be an aspect or an example of theory triangulation. And that's very common in a theoretical framework. Often you'll see studies that use multiple theories to form their theoretical frameworks, okay? So yeah.
Theoretical and conceptual frameworks are basically their scope and specificity. So a theoretical framework is generally more abstract and quite broad in its scope. Theoretical frameworks typically attempt to explain the relationships between very broad general ideas and constructs. In contrast, a conceptual framework is more specific. It typically proposes an explanation for the relationships between more specific concepts or the variables that will be used to measure the more abstract constructs of interest. So whether we're relying on a theoretical or conceptual framework, they both provide a model that we can use to interpret our results and then draw conclusions about our findings.
Oops. So this is a good slide. I think this is a really good slide. That clearly shows the difference between a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework, okay? So the theoretical framework is the broader, more abstract theory in relation to your study. So here she gives the example of stimulus and response in terms of education, teaching and learning, for example, right? So the theory is, it's a very abstract, very general, stimulus and response. When there's a stimulus, there'll be a response. The conceptual framework is, in her particular study, she's talking about new instructional methods as the stimulus and improved academic performance as the response, okay? Now, these are still concepts, right? She's not talking about any specific instructional method. She's just saying a new instructional method. It's still a concept. Improved academic performance is also a concept, okay? But it's less abstract and it's more concrete, more closely related to the thing that she's studying, which is teaching and learning in the classroom or whatever. Okay, so the conceptual framework is how the theoretical framework gets translated into the setting that you're studying. All right. Somebody is not muting their microphone, if I can hear. Okay, I'll continue.
Results and then draw conclusions about our findings. Here's an example of a theoretical framework. We have three very broad, somewhat abstract constructs, and we're imposing upon them the relationships that we expect them to have with each other. And here's an example of a conceptual framework. So the basic elements of this framework are actually identical to the ones that were included in the model of the theoretical framework on the previous slide. And as you can see, the two models are similar. They rely on the same abstract concepts of SES, content knowledge, and academic achievement. But this model, the conceptual model, is more specific in that it identifies the variables that will actually be measured as indicators of the latent constructs. A lot of students struggle to decide between a theoretical and conceptual framework when they're first beginning to really dig into their literature and they're identifying a research problem and they're trying to figure out what their research questions might be and what a feasible dissertation project actually looks like. You know, a dissertation that you can get done in the time you have to do it. This debate with yourself is really a huge waste of time, though, because theoretical and conceptual frameworks, they're not competing. You don't have to pick just one. Theoretical and conceptual frameworks are complementary ideas and structures that impose structure for a research problem and study. So all dissertation projects have a conceptual framework guiding the design. We just don't always create a visual depiction of it. If you write about a theoretical framework and then describe your variables and method, your conceptual framework is automatically implied. It's all automatically there. Some committees will expect you to be explicit about your conceptual model, some will not. Unlike a conceptual model, not all dissertations are developed using a specific theoretical framework as a guide. Whether or not a theoretical framework is specified depends on a combination of factors, including the existence of a relevant theory, the exact nature of the constructs of interest and how you're going to measure them, and your committee's expectations.
Okay, so this is interesting as well. You can see sort of some of the differences institutionally between universities. In our university, it's almost universal that supervisors will expect you to have a theoretical framework. If you'll notice, though, she mentioned here that some dissertations will not have a theoretical framework, at least an explicit one. And again, if you're doing very exploratory research, you know, you don't always have a theoretical framework, although in UPM it's required. Conceptual framework is different, though. Conceptual framework is usually optional, and again, it depends. Most quantitative supervisory committees will expect a conceptual framework. Qualitative researchers usually do not require a conceptual framework. Sometimes they have them, and sometimes they're useful. Other times, they're not really necessary. There are those who are very visual, and they like to see conceptual frameworks. Of course, we all like pictures. So especially pictures that show the relationship between our constructs or variables. It does help for us to get a sense of the whole project and what the student is trying to do. But they're not required. Conceptual frameworks in qualitative research are not required.
As a general rule of thumb, it's helpful to develop a construct map or visual model of your conceptual framework as you solidify what it is that you want to study.
So you notice for the conceptual framework, she mentioned that it is a given that it'll be in the form of a picture, right? A diagram, some sort of map, a mapping of the study.
And you begin to think about your research questions. Even if you or your committee ultimately decide it's not necessary to include the visual depiction in your dissertation document, it's a great way to help communicate your intentions to your committee. And this helps your committee to better understand what it is you're trying to do so they can provide the best maximum amount of support for your development. In contrast, visual depictions of a theoretical framework are often not created except when the theoretical framework is quite complex. For example, when the researcher attempts to tie many theories together into a single project, or when a member of the committee just has a preference for seeing a depiction of the theoretical framework.
Okay, so yeah, so that one is consistent, I think, with UPM. It's rare that you'll find, I mean, most studies don't require a pictorial, diagrammatic depiction of the theoretical framework. Theoretical framework is usually a description of the theory, again, and how the theory is going to apply to your study. It's often, especially in a qualitative study, it's often not necessary or not even doable, really, because it's just abstract concepts and so forth. Okay, so it is quite rare. Some studies have them, and you know, if they do it again, if they do it, it's fine. It's not like you can't do it, but it is not usually expected.
Here's a list of sources on these and related concepts that you might find helpful if you'd like to learn more about the topics included in this presentation.
Okay, so that's the first one. As I said, short, but it is, I think, quite useful, especially for trying to understand this, grapple with this topic of conceptual and theoretical frameworks. Any questions about that? No questions. Let me just move this around. Hold on. No questions at all. I thought that was a big topic with a lot of confusion. No? It's crystal clear now? No? Okay. So I guess you're all clear about your conceptual and theoretical frameworks. That's good. Oh, here's a question. All right.
Yeah.
I'm kachowing so that you guys will ask questions. Okay. Is it advisable to compare a few models? Where are you talking? Juan, are you talking about the literature review, or which section of the thesis are you talking about?
Prof, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I want you guys to compare few models to come up with before I come up with a conceptual model, conceptual framework. So, is it possible to find certain flaws in that models, or is it possible for me just to state the strength and weaknesses of that particular models?
Okay, so these are this is a model that you're not going to use in your study, or you're presenting it. You just want to discuss it in the literature review, or what?
Actually, I do have one model that main reference for my study.
Oh, okay.
But then when I propose, it is advisable to have another model that maybe quite similar to that to my reference model.
Okay.
But I don't know how to go about it actually when the advice come. So I don't know how is it possible to say yes, this is so good and.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. And you may get some different responses depending on the supervisor, but typically in the literature review section, in the chapter 2 literature review, there's the related theories section, right? So you have related theories. Typically in that section, you will discuss, you know, of course, not every theory under the sun, but theories that are most closely related to your topic, you will discuss. And it's good to have a sort of, yes, a comparison to show strengths and weaknesses of different models, especially if on the surface they are very much related to your study. So that helps us to understand, like, oh, why didn't Juan use this theory? This theory is so much related to his study. So you will, in that related theory section, you'll explain to us why you didn't use that theory, right? Because often in a Viva, you might get that question about, oh, why didn't you include this theory in your literature review? So, you know, it's very closely related to what you're doing. So yeah, that is advisable to do that, absolutely. But I mean, that doesn't mean you have to go out of your way and find, you know, 10 or 12 theories and review every single one of them just because, you know, you're supposed to have theory in there. You know, but if there are specific theories that are, you know, closely related to what you're doing, it is good to have that discussion in the literature review, yeah. And then it also shows why you chose the theory you did choose, or the maybe 1 or 2 theories that you did choose. It does explain, you know, their strengths and why you chose them. And so then when you present your theoretical framework, it's not like, oh, where did this theory come from, right? You've already explained its strengths and weaknesses. Okay, but it's really important that students understand there's a difference between a related theories section and a theoretical framework section. So you have your related theories first, which is what Juan was just referring to, comparing, you know, related models. And then after that, you present your theoretical framework. You say, well, this is the theory I'm going to use in this study, and this is how it relates to my study. This is how it applies to my context. You know, this is how I'm going to use it. You know, this is why it's relevant, etc. Okay, so those are two. They both come under they both come under the related theories section, but the theoretical framework is the last part of that.
Okay.
Is that
I assume
yeah?
they want to look at the contribution after the finding of my study.
Yeah,
So maybe so that's the main objective, I think.
sure, absolutely, yeah. Because so you'll go back in your chapter 4 and 5, you'll go back and explain how your theory contributed. Sorry, how your finding contributed to that sort of that theory that you've used. Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, so if you don't present it, then how in chapter 5 your contribution to theory and new knowledge, how are you supposed to answer that question, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Prof.
Now with qualitative research, it's also possible that your findings may show a contribution to a different theory, or maybe one of the theories that you didn't use originally, you may find the finding is more related to that theory. And that's perfectly okay, and that can happen in qualitative research because of the exploratory nature of qualitative research. So it's perfectly okay to reintroduce those theories in your discussion and say, well, you know what, my finding really shows that it wasn't theory A that was that these people were talking about. It was more closer to theory B, right? And that's the emerging nature of qualitative research. So that shouldn't freak anybody out. You can sort of sometimes you get that, yeah.
Prof, after
Yeah.
listening to your discussion with Juan, this is the main reason why I was suggesting this kind of topic to be explored by you, because in order to find the righteous or the specific theory that suit the most to our study, is not really easy, especially in qualitative research. And when you're talking about we will be questioned by fellow adjudicators during Viva, why don't you use this sort of theories, or don't you came across these sort of theories when you were doing your literature review? So I was thinking, like, how do we go about in finding the most related theories to our study?
Sometimes, Amar, it's not the most related theory. It's the theory that you want. It's the lens through which you want to study the phenomenon. A lot of times it's just a choice by the researcher. I want to use feminist theory to study this topic, because I see a lot of issues in relation to gender relations and power. So I'm going to use feminist theory. It's just the decision of the researchers. A lot of times it's just their prerogative. It has nothing to do with which is most related, I come from, a positive youth development tradition. That's what I've been working in since 1994, So a lot of my youth research, I approach it from that lens. That's just my personal theoretical bias, to be honest with you. But depending on what I'm studying, there may be other theories that you can also say are closely related to my topics, but that's the theoretical approach that I choose to use. I want to understand the topic through that perspective. So don't always think of it as like there's this match out there that you have to find. A lot of it is how you want to, again, a theory is just a lens through which you're looking at a problem. And in fact, the video we're about to watch, he gives the analogy of walking into a room, for someone that wears glasses, right, that can't see very well without glasses. You walk into a room without your glasses on, you can't see anything. It's all a blur, right? That's the equivalent of going into a social phenomenon without theory, right? You cannot look at a social phenomenon and say, I have no theoretical perspective whatsoever, because you can't study everything in relation to that social phenomenon. There's just too much there, right? Recently, I was listening to a talk about a guy. He was critiquing the social sciences, the modern social sciences, why social sciences are not viewed as being effective nowadays. And he said one of the reasons is because we spend too much time trying to answer the how question, not enough time answering the what question. And he gave the example of somebody using an ATM machine. And he said modern social sciences will always study limit their study to just the relationship between people. He said, but in reality, in a social phenomenon, there's so many other factors that affect our behavior, right? Not just our relationships with other people. There's the environment, there's the physical environment, there's the technology we're using, there's our moods, there's the weather, there's so many factors. He said, but modern social sciences focuses only on interpersonal relations. It's very limited, right? So that's the kind of thing. Like if you're going to go into a phenomenon and try to study everything, you can't. It's too much. You need to specify. Okay, I'm going to look at it through this perspective. That's your theoretical framework. That's all it is. You need to choose. How am I going to study this? Now, the alternative argument by a lot of the grounded theorists and those people that say we don't need theory is, well, you don't need to do that. You can go in with a blank slate and you can let these things emerge naturally. I would counter that by saying that we all have our own theoretical biases, right? So we have implicit theoretical frameworks that we go in with based on our own experiences, our own education, you know, all those things. You know, so it's better just to be explicit about it, especially as a student, because you can make the case easier, right? So that's the argument for a theoretical framework. It's how you choose to look at a topic, at a phenomenon, right? It's not so much what's the most related theory. Okay, I hope that makes sense.
Yep, thank you, Prof.
Okay, so let's, if there's no additional questions, we can move to the next video. And I think we'll elaborate a little bit more on this. Let me see, share my screen again. Okay. Now, where is it? Okay, so this is Dr. Guy. He's known as the dissertation mentor, and he has his own consultancy company, I guess
Prof,
it is.
sorry.
Yeah, Amar.
There's a question from Amira Fazana.
Let me turn on my chat here. Hold on one sec. Okay, Amir, is it possible to use theory that usually used by quantitative researchers? Absolutely, theory is theory. There's no such thing as a qualitative or quantitative theory. A theory is just an explanation, a very conceptual, abstract explanation of how a phenomenon occurs, right? So there's no such thing as a quantitative or qualitative theory. But you have to be careful, especially in a qualitative study. In a qualitative study, you need to be very careful because you are not testing relationships, right? And so you have to be careful that you don't provide this extremely elaborate theoretical framework, because in a qualitative study, you're not going to have a chance to really explore all the different elements or facets of that framework, right? And you don't need to anyway. You're not testing specific relationships. You're using theory more as a general understanding of how a phenomenon works, and you're going to study the different components of that. You're going to explore those, that phenomenon by looking at those, by specifying those specific relationships or components. So absolutely, you can use theory that's used by quantitative researchers, because there's no such thing as a qualitative or quantitative theory. There's only theory, social theory. Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Sure, Amira. Okay, so let's start this next video, and yeah, please generate your questions. If I don't stop, you can save them and write them down, and we can go back to them. So this is Dr. Guy. He's the dissertation mentor. He does a series of videos. In fact, I strongly recommend you check out some of his other videos. He does one on literature review and on developing a purpose statement, and he's very good at explaining this stuff, I think. So let's just have a look.
Hey everybody, Dr. Guy, and I'm on fire today. This is my second video that I've actually recorded today. This is a good sign, especially considering it's so late in the afternoon. And I'm so excited that you're here about this. I don't know if you're as excited as I am that you're here about this video of how to choose a theoretical framework. And a theoretical framework is the key to quickly finishing your dissertation. It's the second key, actually. The first key is writing an amazing, and let me say it a different way. The first key is undertaking an amazing literature review, doing a real literature review. And I have a video about that at thedissertationmentor.com. Or, excuse me, and See, it's this late. Number two, the second key is having an amazing theoretical framework. The thing I want you to know most is that you can't simply study what you think you're going to study without a theoretical framework. You can't. It would be like me walking into this room without glasses. Now, I can do that. I'm going to bump into things, but at the same time, really to focus everything, to have, to understand exactly what your study is trying to get at, what's needed is a lens. And that lens is a theoretical framework. You're going to love this video because chances are, if you're writing a dissertation, you have felt lost from time to time, and you feel like if there was just some kind of map that you could go through, you would understand what you would do. And this video is a map towards doing this aspect of your dissertation. Now, if you've not seen my other videos and you're not feeling solid about your purpose statement, your problem statement, your methodology, things like this, I would recommend stopping this video and going and signing up for my other videos, thedissertationmentor.com, or if you're seeing this somewhere else, look for evidence of some other videos by me and see what's possible, because there's some other videos that could benefit you first. If you don't know me, I am Dr. Guy, and the number one thing I love to do with my time is spend time with my family and my beautiful bride. And the reason why I bring this up is to say that if you're watching this, you're probably taking away from life to work on your dissertation. And so it makes me a little bit emotional to say that I feel like you making any progress on this is giving you back a major piece of your life. And so, or allowing you to move on to the next stage. So that's why you're here, is watching this video. It's going to be so tempting to skip something, to fast forward. And what's going to keep you from doing that is that if you watch this video and you follow the steps that I talk about, you are going to make progress. And I'm so happy that you're here. I can say this because I have lots of experience. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to say that I've worked on many dissertations and I know what I'm talking about. So enjoy. So step one, what is a theoretical framework? In general, a study looks at something specific, about a specific person, organization, or locale. It looks at a specific thing at a specific place within a certain context at a certain time. And it's very specific, as you can gather from that sentence. So, but that's not enough. It's not enough to have an amazing purpose statement like I just talked about in one of my other videos. Really, what it's all about is naming a specific lens that you will be wearing while you're undergoing your study. So an example of this is, let's imagine we're doing a study where the purpose statement is something like this. And this is what a great purpose statement sounds like. The purpose of this qualitative case study is to examine the leadership approaches of CEOs in their first 5 years in this position at a publicly held top 10 Fortune 500 company in the United States, or held at top 10 Fortune 500 companies in the United States in 2015. So notice how specific that is. We know the who, we know the what, we know the where, and we know the how, and we know the when. And just notice that we could really engage in this study in a number of ways. We could engage in this study through a feminist lens. Now, I don't know a lot about the feminist lens. I haven't used it in many studies myself, but to say that I imagine we're talking about power, we're talking about dominance, we're talking about gender issues of many kinds. There's many different frameworks within feminist theory, feminist lens. But to say that, think about the flavor of this study if we were studying through a feminist lens. Like what would the results of the study probably feel like as we were seeing them?
Okay, I just want to stop right there. I think this is a really good example and I'm going to let him continue, but I just want to stop and sort of give you guys a little bit of a quiz first. So if you look at that purpose statement that he proposes there, and he's right, it's a very good purpose statement, very specific, very clear, very straight to the point. The purpose of the study, purpose of this qualitative case study, okay, so he's got the method there, is to examine the leadership approaches of CEOs in their first 5 years in this position at publicly held top 10 Fortune 500 companies in the United States to 2015. Now, let me ask you to see if you how well you understand this idea of theoretical framework so far. If you were to study that topic using a feminist theory lens, what might the research look like? For example, what might some of the issues that would come out of that kind of a study? Can anybody think of any?
Equality of or wage, salary, wage.
Okay. Yep. Perhaps there's differences in the salaries between men and women CEOs. Great. Anyone else?
Glass ceiling effect, Prof.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Glass ceiling effect. Okay. So those are two good examples. Now, focusing on it says leadership approaches of CEOs. Leadership approaches, that's the focus of the study. So how might that be affected or understood through a feminist lens? I mean, would there be a difference in how men and women, their approaches of being CEOs? Could there be differences, gender-related differences there?
If from the feminist lens, I don't think this study could lead towards that findings.
All right.
If from the feminist lens,
Why?
let's say if they, because maybe if they have like specific target audience when it comes to feminist lens, unless the purpose is to compare from feminist lens or with the contemporary or like typical leadership approaches. I don't know. What do you think, Prof?
I'm asking what you think. Yeah, no, I mean, of course, none of us are well versed in feminist theory. So unless there are some of you out there that are, I apologize. Maybe there are. I'm not that well versed in feminist theory, but I know that feminist theory usually, like he said, deals with issues of power, and like male dominance and all that. So perhaps something that might come out would be how women, how they, what's the word, compensate as CEOs. Typically CEOs, especially in Fortune 500 companies, are typically males. So what kind of approaches do women use to offset that male dominant sort of environment, right? So that might be something related to leadership approaches of CEOs from a feminist perspective, okay? Now, that's just one example. I'm just giving an example. But I mean, Amar, yours and the other suggestion, the glass ceiling, is also a good one. So this is obviously this topic, when we look at it through a feminist lens, we're dealing specifically with those issues. But there's many other, when you talk about leadership approaches of CEOs, there's many ways of studying that, right? We can look at leadership style. We could look at, leader subordinate relations. We could look at the influence, other influences of how leaders choose their approaches. There's so many different ways of studying that topic, right? Do you see that? Do you see that in any topic? And this is a good example. There's many ways of studying the topic, right? So depending on what lens you're using, it's going to very much dictate how you go about doing your study. All right. Is that clear to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, so let's let Dr. Guy finish.
Well, a minority discourse lens or critical race theory, dealing with aggression and power and white privilege. Think about how that would change the flavor of this same study. Just, it's totally a different lens. Think about Ken Wilber's all quadrants, all levels, the AQUIL lens. If you don't know what that is, basically it just is, it's pretty complicated, but to say that there's 4 ways, it's actually quite simple, actually, to come to think of it, but it's 4 ways of looking at something. and then it can get more complex if you wish it to. But to say that, you know, if you were looking at something in 4 different ways, you know, something about like the personal inside me, the external outside me, the outside us, the inside us, those all would have different flavors to them. So just to say that whatever lens you do choose is going to have a massive impact upon what types of questions or what types of things you're doing to collect data. And it's a horrible way for me to put that. Things we're doing. Let me put it this way. Let's say you're doing an interview. How do you know what questions to ask? Do you just make them up? Well, the theoretical lens of your study is going to probably help define what you're asking your participants, if you're asking participants anything. If you're looking at data, like just raw data, some like data points in a table, numbers, how do you choose which numbers to look at? Again, a theoretical framework defines that for you. This is a great example. So, I mean, we talked about, for example, you know, let's say we're doing this study about looking at the leadership approaches of CEOs in the first 5 years of their work at Fortune 500 companies, top 10 Fortune 500 companies. We could choose a theoretical lens like, you know, Bass's full range of leadership model. And if you don't know the model, that's no problem. But just to say is that when we look at something through that model, what we get, the output of that, is we see 3 things. We see 3 options. We see, and not exclusive options always, kind of varying degrees of transformational, transactional, and laissez-faire styles of leadership. So when we look through this study through that lens, we get narrowed down to some very specific types of ways of seeing, right, this study, the results of this study, the data of this study. Another example, you know, a same study, but we are utilizing the critical race theory theoretical framework. And I'm really oversimplifying here, but some of the outputs of that are issues around the issues of storytelling, about white privilege and microaggression. And whether or not you know what each one of those mean, it doesn't necessarily matter at this point, but just to say is that if you're using this type of theoretical framework, notice again, the output changes. It's the same study, but the output changes depending on what theoretical framework you use. Here's a final one. I mentioned the AQUIL theory. And, you know, again, we look at the I, the it, the we, the its things, and quadrants things. It is late in the day, right? The output becomes these 4 different things. So I'm on a roll here, guys. So just to say that your theoretical framework really defines what the output is of your study. And so the next step then is to really truly engage in a lit review. And engaging in a lit review is different than writing a literature review. If you've seen my other video about how to engage in a lit review, I go into many different steps about what it truly looks like to delve into the literature and to live there. And I highly recommend you check that out. You have to do lots of reading. Now, a bar that I set for most of my candidates is that you collect 25 quotes a week. That is 5 quotes times 5 sources every single week. So that way, you know, by the end of 10 weeks, you have 250 quotes. By the end of 20 weeks, you have 500 quotes. And by doing that, you're getting deeper into the literature. You're cataloging what you're getting. Don't go and do that without first looking at my instructions about how to do that. I highly recommend you take a look at that video first. But just to say is that when you do that for real, and you know if you haven't, what you'll do is you'll start noticing that certain theoretical frameworks are being mentioned in the research. And I want you to pay special attention to that. Pay attention to the theoretical frameworks, the theories that are mentioned in the literature. That's such a critical piece because that will help you in deciding which theoretical framework to utilize. I want you to.
Okay, so just to stop there, his point there is very important. And he emphasizes this a lot, the importance of doing a really good literature review and reading a lot. And he's absolutely right. The more you read on your topic, you'll see different particular theories mentioned. And the more you read, you'll see them mentioned over and over again. They'll start to repeat themselves. And from there, you can sort of glean how, previous scholars in your area have, what kind of theories they've used, which will give you, ideas on what theories you can use. And this can help to develop and identify a theoretical framework. Yeah, question? Was there a question there, or was that just feedback?
Just a
Static.
sound, I think.
Just a sound. Okay.
Prof, I have a question, Prof.
Yep.
I just want to know about the previous slide. They Dr. Guys mentioned about quotes. So
Yep.
is this the one that he mentioned is related to the theory, or is it
No, I mean,
a quote that is based
he's
on the
talking,
findings, or what? I'm not very clear about that.
Yeah, I don't know his method for literature review. I haven't
Yeah.
looked into other videos. My assumption is that he is talking about, he's talking about quotes from articles related to the topic that you're studying. I don't know his criteria for selecting quotes. You'd have to go back and look at his other videos for that. But what he's saying is that there's at least 5 salient points. I'm assuming it's more related to findings. But there's at least 5 salient points in every article that you read, and he's saying you catalog them.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of build up your literature review that way. Because I think it actually makes a lot of sense, because he mentioned somewhere else that he uses Excel to do that. And so he will literally create a matrix with all the details of the article, and then the different quotes, I guess maybe by theme or by topic, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But then after go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Prof, I think anything that can be used to make an argument about our topic can be considered as a quote. I mean, in terms of the literature review. So maybe we are doing literature review differently, each and every one of us. So what we understand here from quote could be something that is important from the study or from the theoretical framework itself. That's my understanding.
Yeah, mine too. But his use of the word quotes there, I think, is to take word for word, literally verbatim, those 5 from 5 sources. Because I think what he's saying is that when you see what others have written on that topic, then from there you begin to synthesize. Okay, so for example, maybe after a few weeks, you've got 30 quotes about one particular topic or theory or something. From these quotes from the other authors, you can begin to see the themes. You can begin to synthesize, and then from there you can put it in your own. From there you can put it in your own words. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I mean, as qualitative researchers, we should be able to understand this quite easily. It's more or less a thematic analysis. He's taking those quotes as data, basically, and he's saying, thematize that data, right? From all those different quotes, what do you make of this? What are they talking about here? And then that's your job to put it in your own words, right? And so as qualitative researchers, that should be easy for us to understand, actually.
All right.
But no, I mean, I would highly recommend looking at his video on literature.
Yeah, we should look further.
Okay, I'll continue now.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Theoretical frameworks, the theories that are mentioned in the literature. That's such a critical piece, because that will help you in deciding which theoretical framework to utilize. I want you to make a list of those. Make a list of all the theoretical frameworks that are mentioned in the literature as you're studying them. And I want you to make sure you write down the dates, like for when that study was conducted. So let's say the study used critical race theory and the study was done in 2004. But also I want you to write down the date of when that theory originated and when that theory, perhaps went out of style. What is the name of the chief author who is known for that framework at that point of time? So you're writing down some very key information about the use of that theoretical framework. You need to examine the merits of each. And here are some questions to help you through that process. Which one speaks to you? Which theoretical framework really matches your worldview? Now, I guess some caution on that is that naturally, not every theoretical framework that any dissertation writer will select will be matching their worldview. In fact, it's good sometimes to challenge your worldview. Yet I do think that you want to choose a theoretical framework that you think works. And specifically, it needs to be, it should be one that's newer, not one that's dated. Some of the theoretical frameworks that I've mentioned don't have a modern, contemporary application. They don't have an application today. And that can lead to some problems. If you write your dissertation based upon a 30 or 40-year-old model, that the framework that's 30 or 40 years old, that can really cause a problem. You might have to rewrite a significant portion of your study because you've used a model that is simply outdated. Is it the most widely used one that's now? It doesn't have to be the most widely used, but again, if it's more widely used, chances are there's more material that you could find about this framework. And does it deter away from the usual ways of looking at the issue that you're examining? Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's not. And is it visual? And here's the thing. In my opinion, if it's not a visual framework, if it can't be drawn, don't select it. And the reason why is because visual frameworks tend, at least in my own brain, to make a lot more sense than just textual paragraph form frameworks. We should be able to see in some way how the different parts relate to one another. Now, there are some great frameworks out there that cannot be drawn. So I don't want to lump all those in there, but I do want to say, try to find a theoretical framework that has some kind of visual component to it. Flip through the books about it and you'll see some pictures. Stop there and see what they're talking about.
Okay, so there's his clear bias. He likes pictures. Like many of us, he likes pictures, even for his theoretical frameworks. Okay, so don't feel bad if you want to, if you insist on having a picture for your theoretical framework.
You need to choose one. You want to choose one that has clearly defined terms, that has been extensively used. And by clearly defined terms, what I mean is that when it lists the parts of that theoretical framework, you should be able to understand what each of the parts are. You want to choose a theoretical framework that has exceedingly well-defined terms. And what this means is that it specifically lists every single piece of the framework. Like, let's say, for example, like with Ken Wilber's AQUIL theory, there are lots of parts of that theory, but I guess in the most basic form, there are 4 quadrants in that theoretical framework. And if you look at the literature, especially Ken Wilber stuff, it's extensively defined. I mean, there's no question about what each one of those pieces are. You want to make sure you select a framework that has that level of specificity. You want to make sure it's well used in research, that it's not some weird fringe theory that really doesn't have any application for your study. You want to make sure it has a drawn component, like I mentioned. And really, a theoretical framework can be as complex as you want it to be. So choose well. Choose one that will yield the results, that the detail that you're looking for, the one that will help with that problem statement, and that is fulfill your purpose statement too. But you don't want to select one that's so complex that it's just simply not doable, or one that's just not complex at all and frankly is not going to allow you to write the big dissertation that you're having to write to finish off this doctorate. You do want to select one that speaks to your worldview, one that you agree with, one that either challenges you or one that fits for you, one of those. Not one that you're bored about. Don't select something that bores you. Select something that you're passionate about.
So, do you guys see the importance of when you choose a framework? It's not just what is written in the literature in terms of the technical merits of the framework. A lot of it also has to do with you, where you're coming from, and what you're interested in. Okay, especially in relation to your topic. What angle do you want to come at your topic from? What interests you? So I really like the fact that he emphasizes that, because I think it's true. You are the author of your study, and there are multiple ways. There are many ways to study different phenomena. We can study phenomena in many different ways. So I think that's also something that you need to consider. All right. There's no point in choosing a theory or a theoretical framework that you don't understand. Right. It's so complex you don't understand it, but you think, oh, well, this is the best theory because it's the most complicated and it'll make me look, you know, like a PhD student or something. There's absolutely no point in doing that, none whatsoever. Okay, and I've seen a lot of students, they try to write their either their proposals or their, you know, their 5 chapters, their final report, and you can tell very clearly that they don't understand their theory or their theoretical framework. And recently, I had a student, I was an examiner for her. She did a so-called qualitative study, and she had about 4 or 5 different theories that she tried to combine into some amalgam of, it was just a mess, what she was trying to, and she could not explain even the basics of any one of those theories. You know, and it was like, what in the world is the point? What's the point? Okay, so, you know, think about, you know, what is it that you want to study, and what is it, you know, from what angle do you want to come from? It's really, I think it's really important that I'm glad he mentions that here. Any questions about that? Comments?
Prof,
Yeah,
I just have one comment here
sure.
because I heard that in the Faculty of Education, our faculty, they mention a lot about if you were to present your theoretical framework, you better use some visuals instead of just explaining it using text. So that is what I heard. So yeah, so maybe there's some truth to it, because people like to see visuals and they can understand. I think maybe it will provide faster understanding. And also, I think when it comes to doing research, this theoretical framework will also help us in when we get it, when we generate our data, the data later will help to inform the theoretical framework. Am I right?
Yep.
So in a way that we are contributing to our body of knowledge. That's how I actually can relate that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a sort of bias towards that in our faculty, and I'm sure it's not just limited to our faculty, but yeah, I think that is true. I'm all for it. The only thing is that my only hesitation with, like, I would never require it, only because I've seen too many examples of students that they provide pictures, but they don't describe or explain the pictures well. You know, so they'll provide a nice diagram of their theoretical framework, but they can't really explain it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
for me, like it's more important that you can actually explain it. If you have a picture to go along with it to help the reader understand it, that's great, fantastic. But at the end of the day, you cannot just present a picture and expect the reader to figure it out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, and sometimes I think students, they do that thinking that, oh, if I present the picture, I don't really need to explain it very well. Or they don't really understand it very well, you know, and both of those are problems. So the picture is not going to bail you out, in other words. All right, so just be clear about that. If you're going to present it as if you're going to present a diagram of your framework, you darn well better explain it. You better, you know, it's like, walk us through this map here, right? Walk us through it, because, you know, you have to understand it. It's not just like, you know, the picture's not going to save you, kind of thing. So I don't think a picture in and of itself really will explain anything. I think it's the combination of both. But a picture can help, I agree.
Yes, Prof.
So thank you for that comment. Anyone else have anything they want to share? NJ, you made a comment that this video is so enlightening. Can you please elaborate? Can I ask you a qualitative question? Can you elaborate on how you find this video enlightening?
I think that it really interesting, especially the step 1 that he mentioned, that theoretical framework as glasses and lenses. And I believe that some other philosophical paradigm like grounded theories, they hold to this belief that we need to look and just go into the study without using any theory. But I think it's like we don't have our own eye to see things. There are plenty of things to see.
Yeah.
And I could relate this to my study. When I chose these particular theories and models that I use, it really helped me to shape the interview questions and how to direct and pave way for my studies. So if I don't have this, I think I couldn't progress. I couldn't progress well, and perhaps it is not feasible at all because there's too many things to look at.
Yeah, that's the issue. I mean, reality is multi-layered. It really is. And you know, we all come from our own backgrounds. We all have our own experiences, and all those experiences and our education that we have, they're all forms of bias. You know, so you need a way of reining that in. You need a way of, you know, and at the end of the day, it's really supposed to make your life easier because, like you said, NJ, if you go in, you know, and just everything is jumping out at you, like, where do you begin? What questions do you ask first, right? Now, let's be clear. If you go into a setting, like say you're studying schools, right? If you go into a setting and you know exactly what questions you want to ask, right? What does that imply? Can anyone tell me?
We're in a correct direction. It
Okay,
helps us.
avoid using words like correct and incorrect. You sound like a teacher.
Okay. Okay. With my
like correct
experience,
according to who? Correct according to who?
with my experience, when I provide the with the protocol, the interview script ahead to the teachers.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, when you go in, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, when you go into a setting as the researcher, like you just said before, like, you know, you weren't like, before you had your clear theoretical framework, you said there were just so many questions, you didn't know what to ask first and all that. What happens though if you do go into a setting and you are very clear about what questions you want to ask? What does that mean? What does that imply in terms of a theoretical framework?
Maybe you understand the theory itself, and know how to use in our own research and perspective.
So Shafiq, are you saying that you, based on that, you already have a theory in mind?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be, we would call it the implicit use of theory. In other words, implicitly, you're drawing on a theory, even though you're not clearly, you may not even be aware of it, let alone you're being explicit about it in your proposal. But there is a theory in there that you're relying on. And again, this is the whole personal theoretical bias, right? You know, like I said, if I'm working in the positive youth development field for 30 years, 25 years, of course, every time I go into a setting where there's young people, I'm automatically looking at it from the PYD lens because that's my personal theoretical bias, right? You know, I'd have to work really hard to go into a setting with young people and study it from critical race theory, for example, right? I have to work really hard because that theory is not well known to me. It's not it's not a reflexive kind of theory. In other words, I'm not that familiar with it. It's not one that I would draw on sort of innately or automatically. It's something that I'd have to be very conscious of and really work hard at using that theory to understand the setting because it's not really natural to me. Do you see what I mean? So yeah, if you go into a setting and you have these questions, you know what you want to study, you know what questions to ask, you know what you want to know, there's a theory in there. You're using a theory implicitly, even though you may not be aware of it. And so then it's good to know, well, what theory am I using? Right? If this is clearly what I want to study and this is how I want to study it, then you go back to the literature and you try and figure out, well, where am I coming from? Okay, wait a minute, maybe it's this, you know. Then you can sort of figure out where you're coming from, but it's more or less going to be based on either your assumptions or your previous experiences that, you know, helped form those assumptions or from somewhere. Okay, so you know, a lot of people say we always use theory, like we always use philosophy. Every one of us has a philosophy. The only thing is that most of the time we're not aware of it. It's implicit. We're either using our own philosophy or borrowing from a philosophy that was handed down to us or given to us, or, you know, so theories like that. Okay, so let's just finish up this video. I think he's almost done. Just about finished. Hold on.
And my greatest hope is that a book has been written about your theoretical framework. And the reason for that is that if a book has been written about it, it's probably established enough that it's something usable as long as it fits all the other requirements that we've mentioned. And you can go back, of course, in this video and take a look at those requirements. You will return to this video, I have a feeling. The final step is to buy and read about 5 books, major books on this theoretical framework. Now, if you cannot find 5 major books, then chances are this is probably not the theoretical framework for you. Or at least there should be 5 books that at least mention it and utilize it. Why books? Well, a book is a lot more difficult to publish than an article. So if a publisher went out of its way to publish something about this, chances are it's pretty well established. What I want you to do is read through those books and answer these 5 questions. I'm not going to read through these questions, all of them, but just to say is that you should be able to define very clearly what this theoretical framework is, what are its parts, and you should be able to communicate that really clearly and really simply to anyone that asks. So that's the basics of getting a theoretical framework, and I hope that this video served you. Please, if you like this video, hit that like button. If you think that I have gone wrong, or if you have some questions that you'd like me to answer, please do leave something in the comment field. If an email brought you here, you can always reply to that email. But I would love if you could engage here in the comments field below, so that way we can get into a conversation about this topic, because I want to serve you in any way that I can. And I hope this video has served you. I hope you have a great night. Best wishes.
Okay, so that's the end of the second video. Any more questions or comments that anyone would like to make? How did you find it? Was it useful? Was it useful, or are you more confused than before? Prof, can I use a modified model used in journal and adapt it to my research paper? Can I use a modified model used in a journal and adapt that to, you mean to adapt it to your thesis, Suzanne?
Yes, because I did read few of articles regarding my study. So there are one of the model which is modified by the author itself based on the findings they find. So is it possible that I can use modified model instead of the original model itself?
Absolutely. In fact, this is the way theory develops. This is exactly how theory develops, is that we take a model, we use it, we adapt it. Somebody else takes our adapted model, uses it, adapts it further, etc., etc. So this is the way, this is theoretical development. You know, this is how theory develops. So absolutely you should use a modified model if it suits your study. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
And like he said, it's better to use one if you can find one that has been used at least in multiple studies, if possible, only because you have, you know, there's more certainty that the model is going to be useful. It's not to say you can't use, like, you know, a model that's maybe was just used and applied in one study, but it might be a bit more risky. You don't have, obviously you don't have as much literature to draw on, but you know, you can do that. But see, that's the thing though. I think a lot of students, they don't even realize the difference between a model that's been empirically tested and then other models that are just conceptual. You know, sometimes you will come across papers, and this is, I think, why he's talking about books. Sometimes you'll come across papers that talk about, you know, new models or conceptual models, but they're just conceptual. They have not actually been empirically tested yet. So those kind of models you got to be careful with, because they can be quite risky, you know, if there is no previous research attached to those models, you know. So that's why he was saying, you know, use a very well used model, at least 5 books on it and all that. I don't think that's a very stringent criteria. I think I wouldn't go that far, but that, I mean, his point is a good one, you know. Obviously, he's a believer in the importance of doing really rigorous literature review and all that. And I agree with him. Of course, it's very important. That's why I'm always reminding you guys to read. I'm reminding myself to read as well. As a lecturer, I also have to keep up with the literature myself. And I'm a researcher as well, so I also have to do it, even though it's harder to find time to do it now. But yeah, really need to keep up with what's going on in the literature and keep reading. And so if you've decided on a particular model, you know, keep looking out in the literature for that model. You know, look out for new studies using that model or new modifications of that model, you know, etc. Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Any other questions or comments? Stop sharing. All right, so now we have a little bit of a time dilemma. We have one more video. It's only about, this one's a bit longer. It's about, I think it's about 30 minutes, maybe a little less, 25, 30 minutes. Oh wait, sorry, there's another question, sorry. So Nora asked, between model and theory, some say theory constructs model and we should use theory instead of model. Is it correct? Well, I think what, like from the first video, I think we can sort of glean the difference between model and theory. I think theory is usually in reference more towards those grander theories, you know, where models are usually more at the level of conceptual models. They're not grand theories. Grand theories tend to be very abstract. Models tend to be less abstract, even though they're still conceptual, you know. So yeah, of course, for a theoretical framework, it's often best to use theory rather than a specific model. But of course, I've seen studies that, you know, they base their work more on models. Typically, though, a model will also be based on a theory. I mean, if it's a conceptual model, it often draws on theory itself. So that's why, again, doing a good literature review, you will probably discover that this model that you're interested in actually has a theoretical basis for it. Okay, so that's why you really need to do a very good, really in-depth review of the literature. You know, these things don't come out of the blue. I mean, people develop them usually through. So typically, there's going to be an original paper or book where they provide sort of the theoretical basis for whatever model that they've developed. Okay, so just have to look for that. Okay, so what I was saying is that we have a bit of a time dilemma because it's only 4:25, and this last video is only about 25 minutes. So we could just continue straight on and finish the class early, which we have not done, I don't think, in a long time, if ever. We've gone pretty much for 3 hours every class. Or we can take a break and then come back and then finish up and be done by, say, 5:30-ish, 5:20. So do you guys want to take a break now or just continue?
So maybe we can just continue, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree to continue.
Continue. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll march on, and inshallah we'll get out a little early today. That'll be my Hari Raya gift to everyone. Okay. First class, we'll be getting out early. Okay. So this next video is specifically a qualitative, based on a qualitative perspective. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, it's actually only about 20 minutes. Sorry. Okay. So let me bring it up here. So the first few minutes, she doesn't jump right into theory, but eventually she gets there. So just give her a few minutes. So this video is called Theoretical Congruence and Rigor in Qualitative Research. And the scholar is Denise Castaldo from University of Toronto. And she's in the School of Nursing. So there she gives examples from the health sciences perspective, which is interesting, of course. Nursing, there's a lot of, especially in recent years, there's been a lot of qualitative research in the field of nursing. It's really big now. And some of the best articles I've read recently on qualitative research come from the field of nursing. So I think there's a lot to learn from that field, okay? So let's have a look at Denise's presentation.
I'm Dr. Denise Gastaldo, and I'll be talking to you about epistemological congruence and rigor in qualitative health research today. In this talk, I will use as synonyms epistemological and theoretical coherence and congruence. Most of us conducting qualitative research want to make a splash. So where do you start? First, you should think that quality is at the core of qualitative research. A solid qualitative research requires high-quality data and skillful analytical strategies for the researcher to create a sophisticated account of a particular phenomenon. That's how we contribute. So a splash in this case means valuable contribution, trustworthy results, and a rigorous methodological process. But how do you achieve that? I suggest you start situating yourself within the tradition of qualitative research. So first, you have to understand that we have 120 years of history. And Ravenek and La Liberté Rudman show that there are 4 key moments in the way we think criteria for qualitative research over this period. So explore those and consider where you situate yourself and understand the tradition you're coming from. Second, your topic of study should be social in nature. Qualitative research is used to study social phenomena in health and illness. It includes cultural norms, power relations, it includes human interactions and the creation of meaning. So if you want to use qualitative research, make sure you are looking at those. And third, you need a social theory to guide your study. Another important consideration for a qualitative researcher who wants to achieve congruence is to think, what is theory? How do you conceive theory? So I'm going to put forward some ideas for you. Theory is a lens, a way of seeing that orients you towards a particular worldview or a particular way of thinking about your research. A theory is also a system of ideas intended to explain a phenomenon, where the understanding of the key elements can be extrapolated to other contexts. In summary, theory is an explanatory framework. Also in theory, it's important that you consider how several concepts are articulated within a same theory, and they help you to explain a particular society, a particular group of people. So it is about concepts and explanations getting together. We all come from some theoretical perspective. Don't be naive. Either implicitly or explicitly, you are using theory when you conduct research. So you have to be mindful of how you think about social relations, interactions, power dynamics, because there is where your theory is. More formally, there is a hierarchy that I would say we can characterize theory in 3 domains. The first is the theory about theories or paradigms. I'll read for you what Thomas Kuhn has said about paradigms. He has said something like, paradigms are shared understanding among scientists about the nature of the legitimate problems, theories, and methods of their disciplines. So several theories can be grouped together under a paradigm, and researchers studying that area share some understanding about what is a legitimate problem and how to address that problem with a research design that is solid. The second level is what I already mentioned, theories themselves or theoretical frameworks. I use them as synonyms. In qualitative research, A theory proposes a particular way of understanding either a group, a society, some social relations. For instance, feminism is an example of a social theory. And there is a lower level, a level closer to data, closer to the empirical, that is called by several names. It's sometimes called middle range theory, other times it's considered a theoretical framework, other times people call it as models.
Okay, so you can see right there, she's differentiating between the different levels of theory. So the highest level, the most abstract is paradigm, and that's when you have a group of theories together, like in qualitative research. The paradigm is, interpretivism or constructivism. That's a paradigm. Under that paradigm, you have many different theories, and then you have what she calls the next level down, also known as middle range theory or conceptual frameworks and models. Okay, so these are their differences lie in their level of abstraction, right? Their level of abstraction. And so she's going to elaborate now on the third one.
So all those are conceptualizations, are theorizations that stay closer to the empirical data. In the health science, I'll give you some examples. Think of the concepts of stigma, social determinants of health, self-care, bereavement. All those are frameworks, conceptual frameworks. They are key concepts that have structured the way we think about issues in healthcare. Another consideration for you to have in mind is that all theories represent concomitantly a possibility, but also a limitation. There is no study of everything. This ambition, is not feasible. All research endeavor is a limited practice. And you should be thinking, what is the core of my study? Which are my key concepts? What am I advancing here? And that's where theory helps you.
That's a very good quote by her. All research is a limited practice. In other words, every study has limitations. Every study has limitations. The more you're aware of those limitations, right? Theory helps us to better define our limitations and to sort of set parameters around our study. We know the study is going to have limitations, so it's better that we're clear about those limitations and we set the limitations based on the theory that we've chosen to use to engage in the study. Okay. So I hope that makes sense.
By adopting a theory or a concept to guide your study, you would belong to epistemological family. So be careful and remember to know who are your epistemological relatives, who else has produced knowledge in that area, because you are going to be contributing to that epistemological family. So you have to know other authors using the same theories and concepts who advanced knowledge. But what does a theory do? So a theory, as I said, acts as a lens, helps you to see and to think things in your study. For instance, if I look at a kaleidoscope, inside the kaleidoscope I have identical parts, little pieces of glass or plastic that through reflection create geometrical shapes. So I'm going to show you now 3 pictures from a kaleidoscope. What these pictures have in common is that they came from the same kaleidoscope with the same parts, even though they are different. So now let's apply that idea to research. Imagine you have interviewed caregivers, and now you want to apply a lens to understand what they are saying about caregiving. If you apply a feminist lens, what will you see? You'll see caregiving as a gender-based work, caregiving as a labor of love, sometimes, many times, caregiving done by women as unpaid work. Now, if you apply a different lens, a phenomenological lens, what you'll be seeing the meanings that caregivers construct and how they explain and experience caregiving, the meanings they attribute to that everyday activity. Finally, you could apply, my third example is a different theoretical perspective, such as post-colonialism. If you bring a post-colonial lens in this reading of caregivers' interviews, you will see otherness, you may see migrant care workers coming to Canada to deliver care here, you may see racialization. So basic theories are ways of seeing that create with, same core data, nuances, difference, elements that are highlighted. That's what they help you to do. How do you articulate theory with rigor, you must be asking yourself? Well, I propose two ways. You embrace the key features of qualitative research, and you establish an epistemological congruent study from the beginning. So let's talk about the first. I'm going to mention 4 key features of qualitative research. There are others, but here are some for you to consider. Qualitative research generates contextualized knowledge. So a good qualitative study provides a very good description of the context that shaped those practices and ways of doing that you are describing, your sophisticated account of the phenomenon. So qualitative research is also called naturalistic inquiry, precisely because it happens in a natural setting. Another feature is that the researcher is a key instrument for data generation. So to generate and analyze data, you need the researcher subjectivity, you need the researcher positionality to be considered. So the researcher is shaping the study, and this is something good because she or he or they are considering their interactions with the field, with the participants, and how this process is shaping knowledge production. A third feature is qualitative research is emergent design. In qualitative research, you can refine your research question after you started the study. You can go back to the ethics review board and you can refine your recruitment strategy. But all that should be considered and described for your readers. You have to have a very good description of all your methodological decisions throughout the study. You are doing the best with your qualitative research, so you are trying to achieve a 4th element, that is capturing participants' emic perspective. So participants' perspective are called emic perspectives, and what they do, they address the subjective dimensions of human experience. So you want to learn in depth how these people experience that phenomenon and then theorize it so that it can be applied to other groups. Once you have achieved like a good depth of understanding of the key features of qualitative research, then you're going to establish your study, and I would say you have to start with notions of congruence. I'm going to read for you what Bev Taylor has said about congruency. She says, congruency means linking and connecting ideas so that there is a discernible flow and fit between ideas arising from the entire research inquiry, from the questions, aims, objectives, right through the data collection and analysis, methods and processes, and the eventual research insights and implications that show the application and progression of ideas, faithful to the foundational ideas of a respective methodology. And I would add, faithful to the respective ideas of qualitative research itself, of course. So I suggest you can achieve that in 2 steps. In the health science, it's very important to adopt these 2 steps. That is, you do it and you show it to others you have done, okay? So step 1, I'm going to mention, this is not a comprehensive list, but I'm going to mention some of the things you should consider doing when you are trying to achieve epistemological congruence. So make your theoretical conceptual approach explicit from the beginning of the study. Situate it within a research paradigm, what I have called your epistemological family. Understand the key tenets of your theory. So you have to be clear about what are your own epistemological assumptions when you are starting a study. Use these tenets to guide your methodological decisions throughout the study. Consider how your methods and theories speak to each other. How do they relate? And then you think about the role of the researcher according to these theoretical and methodological perspectives. And finally, you theorize your results to make them transferable to other contexts.
Okay. Anything new here that we haven't come across before, or anything that looks like not clear? Or so she's talking about how to make your qualitative study theoretically congruent throughout the process. And of course, when qualitative researchers talk about theory, they're also talking about theory from the perspective of method, you know? Like, for example, phenomenology is a theory. It's a theory of knowledge. It's a theory of doing research. So oftentimes in a qualitative study, they will refer to phenomenology as their theoretical framework, right? And then they may also have a model or some sort of social theory to also describe the phenomenon itself, okay? So that's also important to keep in mind when you read qualitative literature. Okay. Anything here that's new or not clear? I think these are things that we've talked about in class. So I think a lot of this probably will probably sound familiar to you. Nothing?
Prof?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. This is about most of us are in the seminar class. So we presented, and then one of the comment on my topic is about career development among public servants. So one of the comments is about the theory. Prof. Mai asked me to contextualize the theories to the participants. My sample is the high potential staff. So she asked me to contextualize the theories, which because this was done through email, and then I just don't know how to go about doing that. So how do I approach these questions?
Yeah, so I think what she's referring to, I'm not sure, but I think what she's referring to is how you see your theory applying to the actual setting that you're studying. So for example, again, a theory is abstract concepts, right? So how do you see those concepts in your setting? For example, I don't know what theory are you using in your study, or main theory that are you using for your framework?
I don't know how it's pronounced. It's SAIN model.
How do you spell it?
Model.
How do you spell it?
SCHEIN.
Oh, SCHIN. Sheen or Shine.
Shine. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm not familiar with Sheen's model, but in that model, again, the model is comprised of abstract concepts. So how do you apply that model to the local setting that you're studying? The public, I know, you're looking at public servants?
Yeah. Okay. When you ask how do I apply to the participants, to the informants, should I include my part in the conceptual framework? Should I also include, because I understand that in the conceptual framework, it's just about the career development context. So the participant perspective, I mean, the high potential staff should not be inside the conceptual framework.
Well, no, see, that's where I don't agree. I think in the theoretical framework, you're going to be in your theory or theoretical framework, you'll be talking mostly abstractly. When it gets to conceptual framework, that's where you contextualize, where you take those abstract concepts and you put them in the context, or you present them in the context of your particular study. So for example, if it says something like, you know, employee, what's something related to career development? You know, employee career decision, or what are some of the elements of the model? Can you just give me some, just for example?
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Just go through this. Okay. Okay, I have two career development element, which is the organizational career management and also the individual career management. So this career management merged together to develop, produce career goals.
Okay, so organizational career management. What types of organizational career management practices or policies or norms,
strategies, all those things.
Strategies, what kind exist in the context of the Malaysian public service?
We have all of those. We have, but I'm looking at the practices, the strategies that we currently have based on the current government policies.
Such as, for example, what are some of the strategies?
Okay, strategies, for example, is the continuing lifelong learning. So what they,
there you go. Perfect example. Career strategies is the theoretical concept. Lifelong learning, or practices of lifelong learning, is how it's contextualized in your study context.
Ah, okay.
You see what I mean? So if you go back to the very first video we showed, she took that theoretical framework and then she added the specific dimensions of her study around that to make the conceptual framework. In other words, it's one level down in terms of conceptualization. So for yours, career development strategies is the theoretical framework. The conceptual framework would be lifelong learning practices, for example, as a strategy, as one of the strategies that you're going to study. So that's how it gets. Excuse me, that's my phone, sorry. Excuse me one second, hello. Sorry. Does that make sense, Azura?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, so I think that's what she's probably talking about in terms of contextualizing your theoretical framework.
Thanks, Prof.
Okay.
About the role.
So I'll continue, yeah, with the. Oh, is this another question? Oh, Nora, sorry, just saw your question here. When we use theory triangulation, how to set the theories in research setting? Do we have to refer to research questions, or is there another way? How do we set the theories in research setting? Nora, can you explain your question a little bit? I'm not quite clear on it. Nora, are you there, Nora? Oh, Nora.
She can't talk, Prof. She don't have mic. She's here.
Maybe she can write. Can you write your question again? Not your question again. Can you can you elaborate on your question in writing? How do we have to refer to research questions? I don't know, maybe I'm going to guess. Are you asking whether there are different theories for different research questions? Yeah, okay, I think I see your question. So yeah, there's a possibility that you may use theory triangulation or multiple theories to address all the research questions in your study. Yes, that's possible. Yep. That is possible. How to do that, I can't really tell you. It depends on the study. It depends on the specific study. I don't think there's any formulaic way of doing it. It really depends on the study and the questions that you're asking. Okay, so I'm sorry, I don't think I can elaborate much on that question. Okay, if there's nothing else, we will continue with the video. Okay.
Of the researcher according to these theoretical and methodological perspectives. And finally, you theorize your results to make them transferable to other contexts. So all that is the doing of epistemological congruence. Once you have achieved that, you move into the showing it. So, as I said, this is particularly important in the health science, where people are very keen on understanding how rigor has been developed throughout the study. So you explain the methodological dimensions we explain the methodological decisions that you made throughout this study. All key moments in the methodology that shape the study the way it is. You describe how theoretical perspectives shape the story of the study or the methodology. Those two are very close. You illustrate how you use theory to problematize some taken for granted assumptions in your field of study. So how did you use theory to think innovatively, challenge assumptions? You explain the role of theory in data analysis, that's another element. And finally, you acknowledge your own theoretical contribution to the area of study. It's important for you to claim your originality, your contribution at the end of your study. I'm going to give you one example to make this less abstract now. I'm going to mention my study that used post-colonial theory to study migrant workers in Canada. So this is a study conducted with Magalhães and Carrasco, and we use I'm just mentioning three general ideas about post-colonial theory here to orient you. So we contextualize the phenomenon as a feature of global capitalism and an effect of neoliberal economic practices, rather than say people who migrate should be criminalized as individuals. We move to the social economic sphere and explain how, theoretically, we explain how this phenomenon is happening and why it is happening today. Then we focus on the transnational and local processes that take place here that reproduce the phenomenon of international migration. But we also focus on the health consequences that were not very well understood in the field. So there are multiple push and pull factors, and by doing that, reveal the complexity and the ambivalences in these movements of people around the globe. We also explicitly acknowledge health as a human right, and you'd say, oh, well, everybody thinks that. What we have done is to problematize access to health care as a right of citizens. In Canada, you don't have access to health care unless you are a citizen with an insurance from the province. So we problematized that this is not the equivalent of health, health as a human right. So which are the implications, the methodological and theoretical implications of thinking in this way in my study? First, obviously, we named the participants undocumented workers. We didn't call them illegal immigrants, obviously not. We considered the impact of the position of the researchers. So we were women with Canadian citizenship, but also immigrants and also people sharing cultural backgrounds with our participants. So how did that all interfere and gave us strengths to interact with our participants, to think the data? All that was considered.
That is what? What do we call that? What she just referred to? Who'd like to? Can you guess what that is? In other words, you've already done the assignment. Anyone? Anyone?
Positionality statement?
Yes, thank you, Amar. Very good. Yeah, that's their positionality. She's articulating their positionality as it relates to the study and the participants. They shared a lot of similarities with the participants they were studying, right? So that's, she's referring to their position to the study.
We created opportunity for participants to express ideas never narrated before. Many of my participants, or our participants, sorry, they were very afraid of deportation. They never told people back home how difficult the situation was in Canada. So we had to not only interview them, but we added methods. We used creative, arts-based methods and multiple interviews to help them to have the chance to elaborate on their experience. Another thing we have done is...
How can you use art in interviews? She mentioned artistic methods. Do you have any idea? How can we use art as a method?
To analyze how the participants view the arts, maybe? Their perspective on...
Okay, so for like in her study, she's talking with undocumented workers and their experiences in a foreign country. And she mentioned that she used arts-based methods in her interviews, and I think also probably outside her interviews. What would she do with it? What would she do with it? How would she do that? Anybody have any idea? How can you use art as a form of data?
Prof, can I try?
Of course, that's my ask.
Yeah. Maybe
the participants can actually try to express their emotions, like through the pictures they draw, as a means of as a means of communications.
Yep.
What do they feel?
Right.
I mean,
And
other
so,
than explaining through the interviews.
yeah. And so does the researcher just sort of interpret them on their own, or how does the researcher generate those meanings of that artwork?
It can be through the informants' information as well. They have to explain about what they draw, as well as the researcher. We have to ask questions, of course, if you don't understand what was drawn by the informants.
Exactly.
Is that right?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So we would ask actually the participants to interpret their work for us. So if say they're an artist, and they draw a picture or they do a painting or something that represents their frustration living in a hostile place, we would ask them to basically narrate to us the meaning of everything that's in that picture for us. Right? So it's almost a form of doing observation, an observational field study in some ways. So it's not, we would never attempt to interpret it on our own, obviously. We would let them walk us through it. And again, art is a form of expression. It's loaded with meaning. And sometimes people that are maybe less educated or they're not good at articulating themselves, they speak much better through things like art. So this is quite common in a lot of qualitative studies. You see a lot of literature on this. Something always to consider. So thank you for that.
That we describe the social and health consequences as unnecessary suffering. So, because we believe that this exchange of capital and people around the globe has to be rethought, and the nations can relate differently, treating people around the globe better, we said the experience of these participants is unnecessary suffering. We're challenging the way things are done currently. And then we analyze their subjectivities. In Canada, as simultaneously people who are seen by their families as heroes, but seen in Canada as criminals. So these multiple subjectivities coexisting, and how they were trapped in patterns of consumptions here and back home, and how that entangled them in this current globalization system. So these are just a few highlights of my study to show potential uses of theory to think methodology. So, in summary, epistemological congruence requires an in-depth knowledge of a particular theory. It requires a clear theory methodology link, connections well established and described. And it also requires a consistent utilization of theory throughout your study. If you're looking like the guy on the left first and now you're looking like the guy on the right, don't worry. Sometimes people feel impacted by the use of theory. Just think like Kurt Lewin, who said, there is nothing as practical as a good theory. As food for thought, I would like to leave you with 3 ideas. First, ask yourself, which social theories have you studied to date? You know several concepts, you know several theories already. Start where you have depth, where you have knowledge. And then ask yourself, how does the topic of your interest, the topic of your study, relate to particular concepts and theoretical perspectives? Then you can go and explore other theories, other concepts. And as an exercise, I suggest you read Eichen and colleagues and consider how a critical social perspective has influenced their thinking about tobacco. But rather than thinking about smoking, think about your own topic and try to see how a different theory could shape your thinking about a phenomenon differently. I think this is a nice exercise. And finally, here are some readings that you could do now that you have this introduction to epistemological congruence, and consider more elements for reaching rigor in qualitative health research. I hope these tips were helpful for you, and I hope you have success in your future endeavors in qualitative research. Good luck.
Okay, so that is the end of the third video. Okay, any questions or comments? I see Amar asked a question. Question from a colleague. While using theory triangulation, how do we go about it? Do we use theory 1 for research question 1 and theory 2 for research question 2? I think I've seen that approach. Yeah, doesn't have to be. You can have one theory that covers all your research questions. It really depends on how you conceptualize the study. However, there should be, they should definitely be related. You know, theory 1, theory 2, research question 1, research question 2 shouldn't be that different. Within one study, you want to ask questions that are really sort of clustering around the same core issue. So they shouldn't be that much different. And to say that there's a separate theory for each research question, I would say that's probably a bit much. I can't say definitely either one way or the other, but I'm not sure it would be broken up that sort of succinctly. Theory is more of a broad understanding, and within that broad understanding, you're going to ask specific questions within that broad umbrella. You know what I mean? So it's not like, a theory, you can generate hundreds of questions from a theory. So to say that you only have one question for one theory and another question for another theory I just don't think it would really work that way. Usually theory is, it's just, again, it's like it's an encompassing framework for understanding the entire phenomenon that you're studying, the whole study. Sometimes you may use multiple, theories. You usually no more than two to do that, but I don't think it's necessarily one for each research question. Okay. But again, there may be exceptions to that. I haven't really looked at it that way specifically. Other questions? So how are you guys all feeling about theory? I think there's a few important take-homes from these videos. One is, I really like, again, I like the idea of being explicit and being intentional about your choice of theory. It's not necessarily what appears to be most closely related to what you're studying as much as it is what really resonates with you also. I think that definitely has to be considered. Your understanding and mastery of that theory. And then, what the literature says. Just doing a really good literature review and looking at what theories make the most sense given your literature review. Those are all really important considerations. All right.
Prof, I have a question.
Yes, Shafiq.
I'm referring back to the Miss Nora question about model and theory. As for my research, for example, I'm using Bronfenbrenner theory and PYD model. As we know that PYD model is derived from the Bronfenbrenner theory as well. So in my discussion, am I supposed, how should I address my research? Is it discussing on the Bronfenbrenner theory or for a PYD model, because it's derived from the theory, right?
Oh, I would definitely mention both. I would definitely mention Bronfenbrenner. I would definitely mention the foundations of PYD, but you don't have to go into tremendous depth about it, right? You do want to mention, the theoretical foundations of PYD as part of your discussion on PYD, but your study is really a study based on PYD. So PYD has been developed over the years. It's still developing, but yeah, it's very good to at least mention the core meta theories, if you will, that these models are based on. Definitely.
So my main discussion is on the PYD model, not really go in depth into the Bronfenbrenner theory, is it?
Yeah, because Bronfenbrenner provides that foundation for PYD. So if you're going to discuss PYD, you have to discuss Bronfenbrenner, at least the basics, because that's where PYD comes from. Right? So it's part and parcel of that discussion on PYD. Because PYD is also a practice, Shafiq. You know, it's not just a theory, it's a practice as well. And if it's a practice as well, it came out of some theoretical approach. So yeah. So I think it's part. It comes with the territory. Yeah, you'll discuss it as part of PYD, but it doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, Shafiq. There's a lot of PYD studies that they do that. They talk a little bit about Bronfenbrenner as the foundation of PYD, but then they really spend more time talking about the PYD itself. Okay, any other questions? Well, the whole idea of this whole idea of theory in research, it takes time to really digest it and to understand it, and then of course when you go to write it, it's even harder. So just be patient, try to learn it as best you can, and don't make it overly complicated, for yourselves. Find a theory that you're like. I think Shafiq is a good example. He's very based on his practice as a youth leader. I'm sure PYD really resonates with Shafiq, and based on his study as well. So he can relate to it on a personal level. So I'm sure that's probably one of the reasons why he's using it. And I'm speaking for you, Shafiq, sorry. But just because I know a little bit about your background. So, and I think others, you should also, think along the same lines, based on your background, based on what's of interest to you, based on your study topic. You can actually have a very personal relationship with theory, believe it or not, if you look at it that way. And then I think it becomes a lot more interesting for you as well. I really do agree with what he said, Dr. Guy. It becomes less of something that's dry and abstract and this necessary thing we have to do just to do the research, where it actually becomes something that you're interested in. So you're not really forced to choose a specific theory. In many ways it's up to you, and it's how you make that selection. There's different factors involved, but I think you can definitely make it a personal decision in a lot of ways. All right. What else? Any other questions, concerns? I hope.
Prof.
Yeah. Amar.
Sorry. This is I met someone from one of seminar organized by UPM on the, article writing something. So when I was meeting this one particular colleague, and he's a senior, obviously in his second year, so he mentioned that his supervisor requested a very critical and complex theoretical framework to make it as PhD worthy. So, and the way I observe, I did not read the whole dissertation, so I just go through the diagram, and it's way complicated for obviously qualitative research. So what is your opinion on this matter?
I think it's a death trap. Honestly, I do. I think a lot of students, they can't handle it. It's not necessary, I don't think. To me, it's better to have a simple, not simple, I don't know, simplistic is not the right word. Better to have mastery of one theory and be able to really use the theory and link the theory to your study, and then have a concrete contribution from your finding to that theory, than trying to do something that just looks good on paper. You know what I mean? I just don't see the value in that. And I think that it's an unrealistic expectation for PhD. For most PhD, it depends on the student. Some students can do it, and I've seen some really brilliant students do that. But to expect all students to do that, I think is unfair. I just don't think it's necessary. Again, I think if you can really master one or two theories, that's great. I mean, and by master, I mean, you know, you really know what that theory is all about. You know how to apply it. You really understand its contribution to your study, and you've made a contribution to that theory. I've, you know, honestly, I'm on 90% of the theses I see with students. They can't articulate a contribution to theory in their chapter 5. They really can't. It's really hard for them to do, you know. So, and that's with, you know, with one theory, you know, let alone, you know, trying to create some kind of, you know, crazy framework with 5 theories. And it's just again, it's that quantitative mentality. It's just a quantitative mentality. You need, you know, the more the better. It's that kind of mentality, the more the better. So I just don't subscribe to that approach. So, I mean, I'm not knocking it. I don't think it makes sense for most students. Some students can do it, yeah, but I think for the majority, it's unrealistic.
Because as for me, the novice researcher, I think what mostly I concern is when people start to I think it's like starting to question us. Your research is actually PhD worthy. So I think the word PhD worthy is very critical when it comes to like doing research.
But a lot of times that means depth, and a lot of students don't have that depth because they're trying to do things that are so overly complex, rather than just really delving into one theoretical perspective, really delving into it, really understanding how it's used to understand what you're studying, and coming out with a really rich finding, a really in-depth rich finding. That to me is PhD worthy. That's what PhD is all about. It's not about the number of theories that you use. Again, this is not just quantitative mentality, that positivistic mentality. You know, it's all about numbers. And so they confuse numbers with complexity, and it's not. Complexity is depth. It's about seeing connections in things. You know, it's about linking the concept to practice and concept to what actually happens in real world settings and stuff like that. It's about seeing the world conceptually. That's another thing is that students have a hard time doing. How do you, when you look at a particular practice in the world, how do you understand that conceptually? You know, that's what PhD is all about, is learning all these kind of skills. So I think that's oversimplistic also, you know, like, what does that mean anyway? You know, I want a much more complex framework. What does that mean? You know what I mean? Again, they just boil it down to numbers. You don't have enough theories. You need more theories. It's like, okay, what does that mean? So I don't know. I'm a bit critical of that kind of mentality.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Yeah, no, it's a good question though. I appreciate the question. All right, anything else? Well, as I promised, I will let you go early. But I hope it was a useful session. I hope that you gained a little bit of more insight, inshallah, on theory and use of theory, application of theory in qualitative research. But again, keep learning, keep asking questions. It never stops, you know. It's just these are just links in the chain, you know. So we just keep trying to understand. Okay, so Pucha Blast, I've already uploaded these videos. If you want to go back and look at them again, I'm also recording our class today, so I'll also upload this to the YouTube channel. So I will share the link later if you want to go back and listen to it again. Okay. Okay. No one else? Any other questions? Well, Mariam is out on the frontier there. I like your background. Very chunky.
Yeah. It's Scottish border.
Oh, it looks cold though.
Don't forget your sweater.
Okay. Well, enjoy your free 45 minutes. And so next week we'll be back to our normal schedule of having presenters. So I hope that next week's presenters are aware of who they are and will be ready to present next week, inshallah. All right. So have a good week, everyone. And inshallah, I'll see you all next week.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, Sama.
Thank you, Prof.
All right.
Thank you, Prof.
Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay.